My name is John Phillips, I've got nothing left to lose. I'm stuck in East Haven, I've got the Joe Hynes blues. How much do you have to earn before no one can take it all away? Maybe I'll get out of here someday.
He was a larger-than-life character. Judge Phillips was a unique person. He was the first black man admitted to the Montana State Bar. He owned 12 apartment buildings and 2 movie theaters. The Slave Theater was really in Bedford Stuyvesant. We were planning to run them in 2001. And then all of a sudden, his utilities got shut off. He couldn't figure out why. Goes to the bank. All his accounts have been sealed up. Turns out what happened was 1 year before the election, Hynes started what's called an ex parte proceeding, meaning he didn't know about it. A proceeding, and they had a guardian appointed. Hynes had his former chief of staff appointed as Judge Phillips' guardian. They took they seized control over all his buildings, his bank accounts, and they proceeded to just, and that was it. He was broke. He was broke. And he fought it for years. They confined him to a facility that was a nursing home. We fought it, trying to get him out, and he died there. They wouldn't give him his medication, they wouldn't give him a diabetic menu. And then in the end, his apartment had no heat, and he froze to death. And I was so angry. All Judge Phillips' properties were sold in unpublished auctions, and the guardians just took the money. It's gone. He died homeless and broke, and then they never filed a tax return. $2 million in taxes were levied against his estate. It's just incredible. There's no oversight. There is nobody to go to. Hynes lives in Breezy Point, Queens. He doesn't live in Brooklyn. He moved out a long time ago. Breezy Point is a gated community, strange area. It's all white, 99.9% white. They just started letting Italians in about 20 years ago. And I think that says something about somebody. I mean, I think we should have a Brooklyn DA that lives in Brooklyn. I mean, I have the court papers. I mean, you know, he started the action. There was a court proceeding. He said Phillips was a victim of a crime, potentially the victim of a crime. There was no crime. 7 years later, after all his buildings were taken by the guardians, the DA's office finally came to court and said there was no crime. And Sandra stepped up to the plate and she ran. And then 30 days after she announced she was running, Hynes started investigating her and prosecuted her and put her on trial on some trumped-up charge, which was later dropped. But she went through a trial, there was a hung jury, then they didn't try her a second time. It was becoming too much bad press for him. But, you know, it's not that Hynes locks up all his opponents, just the black ones.
I want to focus on Judge John Phillips. Please do me a favor. This is very important. When you go home, since he's giving you homework to do on Google, let me give you some as well. Google the name Judge John Phillips and learn about how this African-American former judge, who was a multi-millionaire, he had $10 million in assets in Brooklyn. He had multiple buildings. He owned the Slave Theater on Fulton Street. But he did something that he would pay a dear price for. He decided to challenge Joe Hynes for DA in 2001. And guess what? Joe Hynes had him declared mentally incompetent. And guess what? His former chief of staff ended up being Judge Phillips' guardian. And you know what happened? It was guardian after guardian. And Judge Phillips ended up dying broke and destitute, and all of his properties were taken away. If you don't believe me, drive by the Slave Theater right now and you'll see it boarded up. And so now, how is it possible that a wealthy man was ended up being put under guardianship and had Joe Hynes, his former chief of staff, and I believe his campaign treasurer as his guardian? How is that possible? At the end of the day, Judge Phillips deserves justice. Please Google Judge Phillips and see how he treats people who want to challenge him on top of Sandra Roper and John O'Hara.
He mentioned Sandra Roper yesterday. She was indicted for stealing $12,000 from a client. I didn't prosecute her. because she'd run against me, I did what I had to do, and I asked for a special DA. Special DA was appointed, and Sandra Roper's case eventually was settled out. But he said last night, I prosecuted Roper. Just nonsense. Judge Phillips never ran against me.
He was about
Never
to.
ran against me. Never filed or got a single petition signature. And this guy goes on and raves about those kind of things. Look, you have an absolute right to run against me. I never quarrel with that. But for heaven's sake, get the facts straight once.
Well, wait. Let me just say this.
By the way, if I did all these horrible things to this African-American judge, why in the name of God would every major black leader support me for district attorney? Very simple. Because I brought public safety to Brooklyn without penalizing young black kids. That's why.
Well, let me just say this. Last time I checked, Hakeem Jeffries is African American, and he's a major leader in this city and in this borough. Now, Joe, you didn't answer the question. How did Judge Phillips go from having $10 million in assets, and then when you put him under this guardianship by your former chief of staff, he ended up dying broke, destitute, in a nursing home? How did that happen, Joe?
I have no authority to appoint a guardian. Do you understand? Why would he sit here and lie to you? And you've got to figure that out, for heaven's sake. If you want him to be the law enforcement officer in this county, he's got to tell the truth.
Let me just say this last point. He has an obligation to investigate criminal acts that occur in Brooklyn. When he put Judge Phillips under guard, when he basically worked it out so Judge Phillips had to be put under guardianship.
Not true.
What happened is all of those guardians failed, or most of them, failed to do what they were supposed to do with the filing income taxes. And one, I believe, was accused of taking money from his estate. Did Joe Hynes ever investigate any of them? And he said he did it to help Judge Phillips. Well, he died destitute, Joe. He died broke, Joe. He died in a nursing home, and you did nothing to help him.
Folks,
let's keep it real. Let's be honest here. It's important.
No, you're not telling the truth.
You abuse your power against Judge Phillips like you did against John O'Hara, like you did against Sandra Roper. While you give your boy Vito Lopez pass day after day.
Why would you repeat Sandra Roper when we just corrected the record that I did not prosecute her? Why would you do that?
Who started the investigation, Joe?
I didn't start it. I immediately sent it to a special prosecutor with an application to the judge.
Well, you know, people who run against you or want to run against you sort of end up dead, broke, or indicted.
He is just downright disrespectful, unprofessional, and irrational.
Well, Judge Phillips is a very unique man. He is an African-American man that was born in Kansas 83 years ago. During his traveling of his lifetime, he's had various ventures in life. He is an attorney, he's a retired judge, he's also a martial art expert, and he's a community activist. Wow. He's also a multi-million-dollar business person within the Bed-Stuy community. Judge Phillips has always been, from my understanding, the type of gentleman that was very concerned about the community and has always been pro-community and a pro-person, people person. Okay. And the fact now that he's in such a precarious situation in the Guardianship Program that was deemed by Brooklyn Supreme Court.
This is the Brooklyn District Attorney's Senior Citizens Assistance Unit?
Yes, actually D.A. Hynes is the individual who asked his former Chief of Staff, Harvey Greenberg, and friend of 30 years from what I understand, to petition the court to bring Judge Phillips into the Guardianship Program.
No. So Judge Phillips, when was he going to run against Charles Hynes?
I believe it was in 2001 that he would plan to run against him. I know from the records that we have available, it shows that Judge Phillips was put into the Guardianship Program in 2000.
Okay, so he announces he's going to run against Charles Hynes for District Attorney, and Charles Hynes starts the wheels in motion to get him put into custody.
Exactly. From my understanding, and from his associate, Mr. Hardy, Clarence Hardy, who is a longtime friend of his as well, and also a business associate, informed me that he went to D.A. Hynes' office with Judge Phillips to make a complaint against some of the characters within the community that he had entrusted management of several of his properties, and that he felt that there was some scam going on to try to defraud him out of some of his properties. At that present time, apparently from the records, you know, upon information and belief, that D.A. Hynes stated that when he interviewed Judge Phillips, it appeared that he was suffering from dementia. And how he knew this is because his mother was supposedly have had it.
What Dee has discovered, you know, getting into this is not really an isolated case. This is something that's going on in Brooklyn, and it's really horrible. What happens is they've set up this unit at the DA's office called the Senior Citizens Assistance Unit. And if a senior goes to them and has a problem, what they do is they file an application with the court ex parte, which means the person doesn't know about it. They seize their property, meaning their house, and then they proceed to let liens run up on taxes, and a year or two later they sell it in an unpublished auction.
Wow.
And like with Judge Phillips, for example, I'll just give you one example. Judge Phillips was a big landlord. He owned about 17 apartment buildings and 2 movie theaters. And virtually all of these buildings have been sold in unpublished auctions. He had 3 buildings that were worth $800 grand each. They were sold in an auction that nobody knew about, except the DA's friends, and they were bought for $100 grand each. Okay. So, you know, this is like what tech stocks were of the 90s. This is what real estate is of this decade. Right. And it's a form of insider trading. So what happened was, in 2001, Phillips was going to run for DA against Hynes. In 2000, exactly 1 year before the race, the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, and it's on the caption, Hynes versus JJ Realty, the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office files an application saying they believe Judge Phillips was the victim of a crime, and they need a guardian appointed to seize his property, which is what happened. And the DA's former chief of staff just happened to be appointed the guardian. And since then, it's been a horror story. At the moment, Judge Phillips, I spoke to him a few days ago, he's under lockdown in a nursing home in the Bronx. He is, the home wants him out, and he is, at this point, what we're working on now is trying to get a place for him. He's gone from being a person who owns 17 buildings to being homeless. Wow. And his buildings get sold, 800 grand here.
They've gutted out his personal home, his own, you know.
He was going to go back to his house. It burned down a week before he was supposed to go home.
It was set on fire.
It was set on fire, and the Guardians didn't pay the insurance. So that's a shell. So, you know, it's because of Judge Phillips' unique tenacity to stay alive that he's alive. But, you know, if what you're hearing, it kind of just sounds mechanical, court-appointed guardians. Right. You know, but it's like cancer. You know, when it happens to you, it's the worst thing in the world. And this isn't just Judge Phillips. These are dozens of buildings that get sold. But when they seized control of his property, he didn't know about it. Right. And then all of a sudden his electricity went off, and it turns out his accounts have been sealed up, you know, and it got to the point where in 2002 he was living without heat and hot water.
I saw that in one of the court filings. Said how did he end up with heat and hot water?
The Guardians never paid for anything. The Guardians refused to pay for utilities, heat, food. I mean, basically people in the neighborhood had to take up a collection just so he wouldn't freeze to death. And then, I mean, it's really like something out of Dickens. It's really horrible. But look, he tried to run for DA, and then what happened was he couldn't, and then Sandra Roper started to run, and Hynes locked her up. So, you know. But I got to tell you, when the DA's office actually raided Phillips' house, and you know, seized his records, and Phillips called me that day. This was sometime in 2001. I'll be honest with you. When he called me and told me the DA's office just raided his house and took his records, I didn't believe him. It sounded so far out. So I went over, and I got a tape recorder, and I hooked it up to his phone, and I said, Judge, this is what you do. Calm down. You know who the prosecutor was that raided your house. In a day or two, call him and engage him in conversation and see if he admits it. He calls up the AD. They admitted to the whole thing. If I didn't hear it on tape, and, you know, he said, like, why did you raid my house? And he said, you know, I'm going to run for DA. And they said, yeah, Judge, you know, we know you did it before. And, like, they had this tone in their voice like,
You better look at what you have.
Yeah, boy, you're in a heap of trouble now. I mean, you know, and then Phillips says he's going to run for DA, and they go, well, you know, it takes a lot of money to do that. You know, Judge, you see, what it is, you know, the population has changed. The vote in Brooklyn is 2/3 black and Hispanic. Right. And in Brooklyn, you can't stop black people from voting, but you can stop them from running.
Right.
I would like to help Judge Phillips in this situation because I don't believe any person deserves this at all, and especially someone that's their own colleague. I mean, he's a retired judge, he's an attorney, he's a business person. I mean, he's not any Joe Blow standing on the corner bending his elbow with a 40, you know what I'm saying? So, I mean, when do we get the respect that we are supposed to have, you know?
So the doctors that testified, that the DA's office got to testify at the hearing, said he needs somebody to look in on him. The only thing they said that was disturbing is that he said Phillips had told the doctors that he felt he was a victim of a conspiracy by the DA's office because he was planning to run for DA. And based on that,
they start really crazy. Right.
Yeah, they said, well, you must be crazy.
Yeah.
And listen, this doesn't happen by accident. Yeah. You don't come in and steal $10 million of property without people being involved. Right. I mean, no. The judge, Pesci, who has been presiding over this, the court file is sealed without explanation in violation of judiciary law. There's supposed to be an accounting. I mean, you know, Phillips has had, look, we just go to court and you see one building getting sold here for $3 million, another one for $800,000. No one knows what happens to any of this money. In the 6 years that he's been in this guardianship program, there's never been an accounting. And the judge who's presiding over it just keeps saying, oh no, we're all trying to help Phillips. Don't worry about it. Now, interesting, the judge, Pesci, has recused himself on a sale of one of the buildings for about $3 or $4 million because of a conflict of interest. He approved the sale, then another judge approves it, and then it goes back to him. My point is, what's happening to Phillips is horrible, and millions of dollars have disappeared, and, you know, there is nothing, if you have the DA and the court in on it, there's nothing you can do about this. Right. You know, even if, like you said, even if you had relatives here, what are you going to do, call the cops?
Right.
I mean, this is
everybody's
the judge and the prosecutor.
Yeah, the fix is in.
Yes.
There's nowhere to go.
Right.
You know, Ms. Woodburn has filed a complaint with the Attorney General, Elliot Spitzer.
Has he shown any interest?
The Commissioner on Judicial Conduct and Judge Kaye. And the reality is prosecutors don't prosecute each other. Right. That just doesn't happen. So we sit in court and you see these other cases that are similar. It's the same thing. People come in, their mother's house, the DA's office started a proceeding. The DA's former chief of staff is a court-appointed guardian, and they're being sold in unpublished auctions. And you see it all day long. The pattern seems to be that the people that are losing their houses,
they're all running against Charles Hynes.
No, not all of them. There's only one. But what they have in common is they all seem to be living in Crown Heights and Bed-Stuy. They're all black. And, you know, and this is what's happened. You have houses in Bed-Stuy that were worth $120,000 15 years ago that are now worth $1.2 million. Right. And they're being sold in an auction nobody knows about except the people who show up at the auction. And the people, it's just horrible, and it's a shame because, you know, the proper functioning of our courts is what keeps us a civilized society. And these are not small cases. The DA's former chief of staff, so far from what we found, he's presided as a referee over 160 different pieces of property. That's a lot. But look, if they were stealing fees, fine, you get used to that. What they're doing is just taking the whole thing, and then they don't tell you where the money is. I mean, it's one thing to take Judge Phillips' buildings that are worth $800,000 and sell them for $100,000, but then they won't even tell you where the money is.
So where is the money?
There's been no accountability. I mean,
nobody knows.
Nobody knows where the money is. It's
nobody knows. That's what we're trying to find out.
And the trustees, the custodians won't talk to you?
Well, not really. I mean, they passed Judge Phillips on like a paper doll. You know, it's like the first guardian was Harvey Greenberg. Then they brought in Frank Lavoti, which is also a friend of Hynes. Hynes brought in someone named Ray Jones, Ray Jones was the court-appointed attorney for Judge Phillips at the hearing of the guardianship program, and then he ends up being co-guardian with Frank Lavoti, a person and property of Judge Phillips. So, I mean, this is like, really passing the situation, passing the buck, and now it's dropped in Imani Taylor's lap. So, but from what I understand, based on the court papers, when we're due back in court August 24th, that everyone involved is now brought back in. There has to be some accountability. This man, like I said, I mean, the stature of this man, he definitely does not deserve this.
It seems like, in a way, like an incredible American success story. So he came from Kansas.
Yes, on a farm.
And at a farm, so he didn't have he didn't come from money.
Not at all.
Managed to get real estate empire.
His parents were sharecroppers. He was
Yeah.
the first black man admitted to the Montana State Bar.
Yeah.
Probably the only
Yeah,
black man
probably,
admitted. But I mean,
Yeah.
but
I mean, it just scares you to think like a sharp guy like that, who obviously has a lot involved. That if
he
it could
made
happen,
his own movies.
Yeah.
If it could happen to him,
It can happen to
Yeah.
anyone, and
Yeah.
it will happen to
It will.
anyone.
Yeah.
It will.
You know,
I mean,
definitely.
It's.
I mean, we think we're safe, but when you run across something like this, you know you're not.
Yeah.
You know, when you have the judge on the bench in on it and the prosecutor, you're things don't go well when you step
Right.
into a courtroom. I mean, it's
Yeah.
all done.
Sure.
And why Pesci just refuses to have an accounting of this money, why he seals the court file, why he issued an order that no one can speak to Phillips. I mean, none of this stuff makes sense. It's sheer madness.
It's incredible.
And his chief of staff, Dino Amoroso, was making a ton of money off these things, and he resigned last year. Hynes' former chief of staff. I mean, if you think that these guardians, that the judge presiding over it and the DA are sitting there just so some private attorneys can make off with loot, no, that's not the case. There's tens of millions of dollars going. This is the corruption in the Brooklyn courthouse. It's not Gosson with a box of cigars. This is the corruption. And the judges in the courthouse are participating in these unpublished auctions. So it's millions of dollars, and don't expect anyone to do anything about it.
I also think that it's very shameful that none of the governmental officials or judges like Judge Kay, Chief Judge of the State of New York, Elliot Spitzer, you know, where we filed complaints with, have responded. And I'm sure they know what's going on besides the complaints. They see it in the paper, and it's, I mean, you know, I mean, it's like they like ignore it and it'll go away, you know, kind of situation.
And that's what I was wondering, and this may seem naive, but even beyond getting Judge, and I hope we get Judge Phillips out and get him some of his money back if there's any left of it. But is there any way that anybody's going to go after any of these scumbags? We know nobody's going to be able to touch Hynes, but any of these guardians that neglected their fiduciary duty, is there going to be any
definitely
any action against them?
They have to be made accountable. You know, and they have to be made examples of, because we should be protecting our elderly. You know, we should not be taking advantage of them, and when they feel that they have no recourse. And definitely, yes, as they say, heads are going to roll.
Right.
Yes, definitely, without a doubt. I mean, it's not a hush-hush situation like John says, and I concur. This is a man that was a judge, a retired judge, at 17 years on the bench, and, an attorney, a scholar.
How is Judge Phillips doing?
He's doing great under the circumstances. I mean, he always states that, he never drank, he never smoked, he's a martial art expert, and he, holds on to his health and to his ideas, and he knows what they're doing to him. He says all the time, these SOBs are stealing my buildings, my property,
Councilman David Yatsky, Brooklyn, in which he says, when I started to think about running for district attorney, more than one person said to me, you better be clean as a whistle, and even if you are, you might still get indicted. The allegation, Mr. Hynes, is that anyone in last couple of years that decides to challenge you, to run against you, somehow they end up indicted.
There is nothing about me that would suggest that if you run against me, I'm going to be involved in getting you indicted. It's ridiculous.
I don't think Hynes wants the truth. Not only me, he works on anybody who runs against him. After him for certain ways, he took my house apart, trying to find something he used against me. There's a lot of crooked things going on in politics, particularly when you run against somebody like Hynes. He worked against me a certain way that I was just shocked.
It's all a plot to, to sell all this stuff. That's it. Like he's crazy. No, they don't say nothing to him. They don't let him out the place. They don't let him come out for air. He's the only one in the nursing home that he got to have a monitor on him. He's definitely in jail.
I didn't come here, this place here, on my own.
My name is John Phillips. I've got nothing left to lose. I'm stuck in East Haven.
Well, we hopefully the judge will be signing the papers so he can get home. So he can at least get out the nursing home and get back to Brooklyn. We'll see from there.
Maybe I'll get out of here someday. I used to be a lawyer. I used to be a judge. Nothing really matters when the DA's got a grudge. They can lock you up and throw away the key. I just never thought it could happen to a guy like me. 17 years on the bench, overturned only one time. Thought I'd run for DA while I was still in my prime. A friend of Joe Hynes declared me incompetent, a danger to myself and to the establishment. They dragged me to court, and how did the judge find? Running against Joe Hynes, well, that proves he's lost his mind. Take control of his money before he wastes it on some fool campaign.
There's no reason they should hold me up now.
Taking Hynes,
I think I want to go home.
The very definition of insane. They came to my house and held me prisoner. Took my records to Hynes' campaign treasurer. They took control of my property, and they cut off my heat.
It is absolutely offensive to our justice system whereby a sitting district attorney uses the people's criminal justice system as his weapon to cause pain, inflict pain, as he has stated in the past, and I can attest to pain, as you mentioned the indictment.
Thank you all for being out here in all this cold to support me. I'm here to declare my candidacy for the District Attorney of Brooklyn. I want to make it absolutely clear, first and foremost, this is no personal grudge. I'm not here for personal grudges. I'm here because the people of Brooklyn deserve to have a district attorney whose primary interest is the people of Brooklyn.
The DA's office has got so much power. If you think about it for a moment, it's not just sending someone to jail. The mere fact that you are investigated causes you to go out and hire a lawyer, spending thousands of dollars for representation.
The district attorney keeps people safe in their homes in the broadest sense of the word, which means not only does the district attorney prosecute street crime, but the district attorney prosecutes things like predatory lending, so people don't lose their homes through, fraudulent scams.
Things have changed because now, not only was there myself as his challenger as of January of this year, we had four or five others that were also against the current district attorney. So I think that's a good thing. But for me doing what I did in 2001, would there be a race for district attorney this year? I don't think so.
Clarence and Joe Hynes were very close. They worked together on Clarence's people supported Hynes' re-election several times over. I mean, they worked hand in hand. Now, Hynes realized that in 2005 he'd have another re-election coming up, and so he had to pivot in some fashion to show himself, to distance himself from the Brooklyn machine under Clarence Norman. So what Hynes did was convict Clarence in a series of pretty minor charges. Will that clean up the system? No, it won't. It won't, because you still have people like Joe Hynes in office.
Mercy from his kingdom and strong leadership from his political leaders. You have seen their faces. You have heard their cries.
Charles Joe Hynes planned it well. This evening at this historic church, pastored by Reverend Herbert Daughtry, I plan to announce, and I am announcing for the first time publicly, I will end my race for Brooklyn District Attorney.
That district attorney's position is extremely powerful because it can change someone's life, but not only that individual's life, it can have an impact for that individual's generation and the next generation and the generation beyond that.
Brennan is the leader of the so-called reform movement, which is what Hynes didn't have. And Brennan made the deal that I will be able to deliver certain things for you if you arrest O'Hara.
Mr. O'Hara, I want to thank you for coming in tonight. The Court of Appeals has heard only 44 criminal cases last year, and yours is going to be one of the cases they're going to hear now. It's an unusual, very, very bizarre case almost.
Well, it's never happened before.
You registered to vote from your girlfriend's address.
It's registering to vote and voting from a place that's not my principal and permanent residence.
So the district attorney's office, they brought what?
It was 7 felony counts. One count was when I registered to vote, and each time I voted was a felony count.
And this isn't just, I figure people must register to vote and vote from a place that's not their residence all the time. There must be thousands of felons like you in New York State.
I hear it almost every day. Someone will say something like, well, you know, I still vote in Brooklyn, even though it's almost like some people, it's a tradition. Maybe they grew up in Brooklyn and they moved out to Long Island, but they still come back and vote with their parents on every election, stuff like that. Yeah,
but these people haven't been prosecuted.
No one's ever been prosecuted.
How many?
John Kennedy O'Hara entered politics. He knew it would be rough. He would have to take his licks. Nobody knows what the future's gonna be. But what happened to O'Hara was a travesty. What happened to O'Hara was a travesty.
All right, it's election night. Polls are probably closing in about an hour and a half. It's 7:30 now. And the turnout here is medium. This is an area where Sampson should do well. The numbers in Bay Ridge are much lower. I've never seen such high apathy. Not many people are voting. But Sampson's areas look like they turned out heavier. You know, it's I think Sampson's going to win. Come on. Pay attention, will you?
58% of more than half the precincts reported so far.
This place is kind of quiet, you know?
That's Mayor Bloomberg on the phone calling the DA to congratulate him.
In 4 years, do you think this has sent a message to the other people who might run against him?
Of course, Emmett will be around 4 years from now on the next campaign, because I have no interest in leaving this job.
You did a show about this about 5 years ago about trying to free Judge Phillips. Well, that didn't happen. To make a long story short, just to tell the audience, Judge John Phillips was a monumental character. He was a judge in Brooklyn for many years. He was such an older fellow. You know, he had an interesting background. World War II vet. He was the first black man admitted to the Montana State Bar. He was a real groundbreaking type of guy. And I met him in the summer of '76 when I was 15 years old. And he was running for civil court judge out in Bed-Stuy. And I grew up in Bay Ridge, and I used to pedal my bike from Bay Ridge to Bed-Stuy. I mean, these two neighborhoods were only 5 miles apart, but they were two different worlds.
Sure.
He was running for civil court judge, and his poster said, you know, vote for the Kung Fu judge. He was a black belt karate expert. Wow. And he got that nickname. It really stuck with him forever, the Kung Fu judge, which he enjoyed. It didn't bother him.
So he was a colorful figure.
He was very colorful. I remember riding around in a sound truck in the summer of '76 with the speakers blasting Kung Fu Fighting, you know, that hit song, and it was terrific. He got elected in '76. It was a 10-year term. And I remained. I always looked up to him. You know,
so he was a sort of a mentor to you.
Yes, yeah. And 10 years later, they knocked him out. You know, and then he went back. He got on the bench and got elected again in '92. And he had to retire in '95 because he reached the age of 70. It's a mandatory retirement age.
Okay.
And he did a writ of certiorari to the U.S. Supreme Court trying to challenge that. I worked on that with him. And then his downfall was when he talked about running for district attorney.
So here we go again. Somebody else running for district
Oh,
attorney here in Brooklyn.
it was horrible. It was horrible.
Yeah, and so what happened to him?
What happened was 1 year before the election, the district attorney starts a secret proceeding saying he's a victim of a crime and we need to seize all his assets.
He's a victim of?
There was no crime. Turns out there was no crime. This was just a guise. They go in, they get an order stamped, and Judge Phillips that day went from owning 12 apartment buildings and 2 movie theaters. He went from being that day to being homeless and destitute. They sold all his buildings except the 2 movie theaters and just kept all the money, literally. I mean, this is just to make a long story short, that's what happened. And he died homeless and $2 million in debt because the Guardians just sold his property, kept the money, and they never filed a tax return. This is the corruption in the Brooklyn courthouse. And Judge Phillips, as there's been articles written about him, and it's gotten out there a little, but it's not an isolated case. I mean, this is the corruption in the Brooklyn courthouse. The DA's office seizes property, they let liens pile up, and then they sell it in an unpublished auction. Like Phillips had buildings that were worth 800 grand that sold for 100 grand.
Incredible. And it's not like he didn't have family that cared about him or would have been willing to look after him.
Well, that's the scary part about all this. I mean, if this can happen to a judge, then who is safe? You know, because I know people hear these stories and they think it's not going to happen to them.
Sure.
He went in there to try and fight it when they were trying to declare him incompetent. And a doctor takes a stand and said that he interviewed Phillips, and Phillips felt he was a victim of a conspiracy by the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. And the judge said, well, he must be crazy.
He must be paranoid because
he wasn't.
Surely the good-hearted people in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office wouldn't really be out to get somebody. That would be that sounds crazy.
They sealed up his assets. I mean, Phillips had money. Okay, that's what and that's how he got elected judge twice. He bankrolled his own operations. And, you know, Charles Hynes did not want a black man who was worth $10 million running against him in a Democratic primary in Brooklyn. He had already had a couple of bad races. He ran for governor and lost, so the DA was vulnerable. And Phillips felt bad about what happened to me, and he was going to run for DA, and they just seized his assets, and they put him away. And I know these facilities that they had him in, they're called assisted living facilities.
Sounds nice. Sounds like they're there to take care of him.
Well, you know, if they have a court order, you know, assisted living facilities are allowed to confine people. It sounds ugly, you know, it's like these outsourced prisons, but that's the way it happens. So it was devastating. He was in this facility. He was there for 8 months in Brooklyn on Grand Army Plaza. And he was there for 8 months, and when he got there, the only problem is he needed a diabetic menu. They refused to give him a diabetic menu.
Why did they do that?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Nobody could get in to see him.
Nobody could get in to see him. We were fighting with him, and his nephew finally gets a court order to get his medical records from him. They wouldn't give his medical records, and the order was signed the day before he died. Right after that, I worked to get reinstated as a lawyer, because he kept asking me about that, and I got reinstated, and then the first lawsuit I filed when I get reinstated was against the assisted living facility for wrongful death and, you know, med malpractice. I mean, they have a statutory duty to provide a menu, to provide a medication plan. ALF's still like hospital. I mean, they have a duty to do certain things. So it was my first case when I got reinstated, and the lawsuit is going on, and an article appeared about it in the Daily News, and one of the defendants calls, and they're interested in maybe settling it. And I said to them, I said, how can you justify an assisted living facility refusing to give them a diabetic menu? And the attorney said, well, we're not an assisted living facility, we just say we are. And it's just surreal. And there were articles about this in the paper, not that it wasn't an ALF, but there were articles about him being under lockdown. And I just think we have reached a point where we've just become, as a society, so used to seeing black people locked up. I mean, it just...
Unfortunately, you're probably right about that.
It's just like not a big deal anymore, you know? And like now we have landlords acting as outsourced prisons. You know, I've gone from seeing this country in 1980, there were 300,000 people in prison, and I think now it's like 2.5 million. What makes the story surreal is that it happened to a judge.
Right.
And, I mean, if it can happen to a judge...
Yeah, this is not somebody who is not aware of the system, who's powerless. Usually a judge is, like, if a judge can't protect himself, you know, who can?
Yeah. Nobody prosecutes a prosecutor. And we've... uncovered. I mean, Phillips is, and while he was in there, his estate was looted. You know, he was just, he was wiped out. And the Guardians that sold $10 million in property never filed a tax return over 7 years. So now the estate has $2 million in tax liens, which, you know, we're working on getting it straightened out. When I got reinstated, I met with Treasury agents from the IRS, and we filed criminal complaints with everybody. Nothing seems to happen. I mean, you know, when the DA is covering for you, you are above the law. And there are people above the law. And what happened at Phillips was very sad. I mean, I'm not just, in the cases, this case is big, it takes a lot of time. And I'm not just doing it because I feel bad about what happened to the guy. I do feel bad.
Right.
And, you know, that's one issue, but it's not an isolated case. And this facility, you know, when it gets to trial, if they're facing that punitive award, I mean, they will feel it, and they will hopefully straighten it out. But you know, it's a very sad story. This is not a mom and pop operation. This is a big complex, you know, and there are people there that think they're in an ALF, you know. The DA's chief of the Rackets Bureau wrote a letter published in the Brooklyn paper saying that they are not bringing any criminal charges against anybody. And Judge Phillips read that letter about a month before he passed, and he couldn't get over, and you know, I know how he felt. I mean, look, we're not talking about one or two people involved here. You know, you have judges, you have guardians, you have people who are supposed to be overseeing this stuff. Yeah. There's a lot of people that sat by. How attorneys could sell $10 million in property and not file a tax return? Yeah. I mean, I just can't get over that stuff, you know. And I think, but you know, quite often, honestly, in civil cases, attorneys don't really prepare to go to trial. They kind of move it along. 98% of the cases settle. You know, this case is going to go to trial. Like I said, this is not isolated, all right? The DA's office has a thing called the Senior Citizens Assistance Unit, and they go out and scope out senior centers looking for people that have complaints. And if you have a complaint and you're old and you own property, that means you're complaining, and they will seal up your assets, and 2 or 3 years later, it's sold in an unpublished auction.
It's Orwellian.
I spoke to him the night before he died. I called him. It was on a Friday night, and I called him, and I would go see him every week. I would get in there because I was making noise, so they did let me in to see him. And each week when I would call him, because I would have a routine of going to see him, I think sometimes, you know, elderly people, he was 83, I think they need some routine in their life. And whenever I would call him, he would always say, when are you swinging by? You know, when are you going to come by? And I would usually say Tuesday. And I called him on a Friday night. It was like 7 o'clock, and he was already in bed. And he was so deflated. He said, they're selling the Slave. He owns the Slave Theater in Bed-Stuy, the Slave movie theater. Okay. And he said, they're selling the Slave. And I said, yeah, I know, Judge. I said, well, we're going to fight this. And I said, I'll come by and see you on Tuesday. And he said, you take care, buddy.
Okay, so
and the next day he collapsed in the elevator and he died.
Wow.
And I'll never forget that.
Earlier this month, we told you about a Brooklyn assisted living facility that suddenly announced it's closing. Patients were given just 90 days notice to leave. Now New York One has learned the facility has a long history of questionable practices, which a lawsuit claims to have led to several deaths. Our Janine Ramirez has more.
Looking out on Grand Army Plaza in Prospect Park, the Prospect Park Residence Assisted Living Facility is prime real estate. Owner Haysha Deitch wants to turn it into condos, forcing about 100 elderly patients out. But New York One has learned he's facing legal action. Not for the evictions, but court papers filed Tuesday accuse him of being responsible for the wrongful deaths of 6 patients, including a prominent judge, John Phillips.
They mismanaged the judge's medical condition. They did not provide him, he was a diabetic, they didn't provide him with a diabetic menu. They didn't monitor his sugars properly.
These state health department documents from 2009 find the facility wasn't even licensed. This letter says in part, it appears that you are providing residential care and services to adults residing in your facility. A review of our records indicates that you do not have such certification.
We believed, and everyone else involved in the case believed, was a licensed assisted living facility. And it turns out that they weren't licensed at all.
These pictures taken inside 2 years ago are evidence in the case against Deitch. The lawsuit alleges dementia patients were kept confined in a unit here. Signage at the elevator says, do not let residents on unless properly supervised.
These are people who need 24-hour care. There are people who are bedridden. They had bed sores.
Now this criminal complaint is being filed asking Brooklyn District Attorney Ken Thompson to investigate. The complaint also alleges medical records and incident reports are missing. Representatives for Deitch wouldn't comment on this suit, but said a federal case against him was dismissed because it lacked merit. The facility finally got a license by the end of 2012, only to submit a closure plan with the health department.
Really ruthless. Now they're using the license to get people out of that building so they can convert it into condos within 90 days.
Despite protests, the closure plan is moving forward. In Brooklyn, Janine Ramirez, New York 1.